He was just a little orphan boy, shivering in the cold, clutching the only bag he owned. One mistake, one wrong turn, sent him knocking on the wrong door. But when the couple inside opened it, their world shattered. They had prayed for a child for years, and when they saw his face, they fell to their knees and cried, "Please, be our child." What happened next broke every heart that heard it, and it will break yours too. The night was unusually quiet in the small mountain town, the kind of silence that makes every creak of wood and whisper of wind feel heavier than usual. Down a narrow dirt road, tucked between towering pines, sat a row of scattered cabins, each one with a small lantern glowing faintly in the window. That night, one of those lanterns would become the beacon for a story no one in town would ever forget. It began with a mistake, a simple human mistake that carried the weight of destiny on its shoulders. The orphan boy's name was Samuel. He was only 8 years old, a frail child with wide, searching eyes that seemed too old for his small frame. He had already lost more than most grown men could imagine. His parents had both died in a tragic accident, and for months he had drifted between distant relatives, none willing to carry the burden of raising him. Eventually, he was taken to the town's orphanage, a place known for its strict rules and cold, narrow beds. But Samuel was not meant to stay there forever. On that night, he was meant to be delivered to a family who had expressed interest in fostering him. The matron of the orphanage, weary and distracted, scribbled down an address for the man escorting Samuel to his new home. But whether it was fatigue, carelessness, or something else entirely, she wrote the wrong number. Instead of the Williams cabin where Samuel was expected, the address pointed him to a different place entirely. A cabin belonging to a couple who had spent years battling infertility, years of empty cradles and broken prayers. Their names were Henry and Margaret Dawson. And when Samuel knocked on their door, everything changed. Samuel's small knuckles tapped nervously against the wooden door, the sound barely audible over the wind. He stood shivering, clutching the handle of his tattered bag, the only possession he had left. Inside, Margaret stirred at the sound. She and Henry had been sitting by the fire, lost in another quiet evening of silence that had stretched on for years. They were a couple bound together by love but fractured by loss. Dozens of times they had tried to start a family, but fate had denied them each time. Doctors had told Margaret her body could not carry a child. They had considered adoption, but the process was long, costly, and painful to even discuss. So, they had accepted their lives as they were, two people together, yet constantly reminded of what they lacked. When the knock came, Margaret frowned and looked at her husband. Few ever visited their cabin so late. Henry rose, his boots heavy against the creaking floor, and opened the door. There, framed in the pale glow of the lantern, stood Samuel. His eyes were wide with fear, his lips trembling as he whispered, "I think I'm supposed to be here." Henry blinked, confused. He glanced past the boy, expecting to see an escort or a carriage, but the road was empty. Just the boy, standing alone, with nothing but a bag and a hope that he had found his place. Margaret appeared at Henry's side, and the moment her eyes landed on Samuel, something inside her chest broke open. The smallness of him, the loneliness radiating from his thin frame, struck her with a force she could not explain. Henry cleared his throat. "Son, are you lost?" Samuel shook his head, though his voice wavered. "The lady at the home, she said I was to stay with a family tonight. I think it's here." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. She felt her knees weaken as tears filled her eyes. She wanted to pull the boy into her arms instantly, to shield him from the cold, from the world, from every cruelty he had ever known. Henry, ever the cautious one, hesitated. He looked at his wife, saw the raw longing in her face, and knew what she was thinking. Still, something inside him stirred as he looked at Samuel. The boy's eyes, so desperate, so unsure, seemed to pierce straight through the hardened shell Henry had built over the years. For the first time in a long while, Henry felt the ache of what they had been missing. "Come inside," Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. She stepped aside, and Samuel hesitated only for a moment before shuffling in. The warmth of the fire washed over him, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe. Margaret knelt before him, gently taking his bag. "You're safe now," she said softly, though her heart thundered in her chest. Henry closed the door behind them, sealing Samuel's fate in that moment. They sat him by the fire, offered him a blanket, and Margaret quickly fetched a bowl of warm soup. Samuel ate quietly, his small hands trembling around the spoon. Every glance Margaret stole at him deepened the ache in her chest. She saw not just a child in need, but the child she had prayed for night after night. Henry watched silently, knowing his wife's heart was unraveling in front of him. "Do you know our names, son?" Henry finally asked. Samuel shook his head. "No, sir. They just told me this was where I'd be." Henry frowned, realizing something was off. But before he could question further, Margaret spoke, her voice trembling. "It doesn't matter what they told you. You're here now, and maybe this is where you're meant to be." The words hung heavy in the room, words that seemed to break open wounds too long ignored. Henry felt his throat tighten. He wanted to correct her, to say this was surely a mistake, but the sight of Samuel curled under their blanket stopped him. For once, he didn't have the strength to deny what his heart was whispering. Samuel looked up at them, his eyes filled with uncertainty. You don't want me to leave?" Margaret's tears spilled over as she reached for his hand. "Leave? Oh, child, I've been waiting for you my whole life." Her words cracked something inside Henry. He lowered himself into the chair, his hands trembling as he whispered, "Please, be our child." And in that instant, the wrong knock became the beginning of a story that would tear through every heart that heard it. The room fell into silence after Henry's trembling words, as if even the fire itself paused to listen. Margaret's tears dripped onto Samuel's tiny hand, and the boy, who had known only rejection and abandonment, felt something he had never felt before. Someone truly wanted him. His lips quivered, his throat tightened, but for the first time in his young life, he whispered back, "Can I? Really?" Margaret pulled him into her arms without hesitation. She clutched him to her chest as though letting go would shatter her heart into pieces. Henry, watching from his chair, pressed his palms over his face. His shoulders shook, not from sorrow, but from a release of years of buried pain. That one simple knock had brought a child into their home, and the emptiness that had haunted them seemed to fade into the background. But fate has a way of testing joy. Outside the cabin, the snow had begun to fall harder, coating the path that led back to the orphanage. The escort who had delivered Samuel had already returned, convinced he had left the boy at the correct address. By morning, the mistake would be discovered. But for tonight, in the Dawson cabin, Samuel was theirs. Margaret led the boy to a small guest room, a space that had been empty for years, used only to store old quilts and dust-covered books. Yet, as she pulled back the sheets and tucked him in, it felt transformed. It wasn't just a guest room anymore, it was a child's room, alive with a presence that healed wounds deeper than words could reach. Samuel's eyes fluttered as sleep overcame him, but before he drifted off, he whispered, "Thank you, Mama." The word struck Margaret like lightning. Her breath caught in her throat, and she collapsed onto the edge of the bed, holding his small hand against her lips. She had waited a lifetime to hear that word, prayed for it through years of heartbreak, and now it had been given to her by a child who was never meant to be hers. Henry stood in the doorway, his rough hands gripping the frame. His eyes softened, and though he tried to remain strong, tears streaked down his face. He whispered into the shadows, "Please, Lord, don't take this away." The next morning, Samuel awoke to the smell of fresh bread and the sound of Margaret humming in the kitchen. For the first time since his parents' death, he felt safe, as though he belonged. Henry helped him wash up, even showing him how to lace his boots properly, his large hands steadying the boy's small fingers. To Samuel, it felt like a father's touch, something he had been aching for but never thought he'd feel again. The Dawsons' cabin, once quiet and heavy with silence, was filled with laughter and footsteps. Samuel told them stories about the orphanage, the cold nights, the tasteless food, the way the other children teased him for being so quiet. Margaret listened intently, holding back her tears, and promised him he would never feel unwanted again. Henry nodded, though in the back of his mind, the nagging truth lingered. This boy was sent here by mistake. By noon, that truth arrived at their door. A sharp knock broke the morning peace. Henry opened the door to find Mrs. Clark, the orphanage, matron, standing on the porch with snow dusting her coat. Her face was pale, her eyes frantic. "Mr. Dawson, forgive me, but there's been a terrible mistake. The boy, he was meant to go to the Williams family, not here. I must take him back, immediately." Margaret, who had been stirring soup, froze. Her ladle slipped, clattering into the pot. Samuel looked up from the table, his spoon halfway to his mouth. His eyes widened in fear as he saw the matron. Henry's jaw tightened. He glanced back at his wife, then at the boy. The thought of Samuel leaving ripped through him like a blade. "Mrs. Clark," he said firmly, "this boy is safe here. He's warm, fed, and cared for. Surely one night's mistake is no crime." But Mrs. Clark shook her head. "The Williams family has been waiting months for him. They're expecting him today. I cannot leave him here, no matter how kind your intentions." Margaret rushed forward, placing herself between Samuel and the door. Her voice cracked as she cried, "No, please, you don't understand. We've prayed for a child for years. When he knocked on our door, it was as if heaven itself sent him. You can't take him from us. Not now. Not after this." Samuel's hands trembled. He slid from his chair and clung to Margaret's skirt, his small voice desperate. "I don't want to go. Please, let me stay." Mrs. Clark's stern expression faltered. She had seen children beg before, but something about Samuel's plea, paired with Margaret's broken sobs, cut deeper than she expected. Still, duty weighed heavy. "It isn't up to me," she whispered. "The papers, the process, they belong to the Williams family." Henry stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. "Then let us start our own process. Let us fight for him. We may not have been on your list, but perhaps we were on God's. This boy belongs with us." Mrs. Clark hesitated, torn between rules and compassion. Finally, she said, "I will return tomorrow. Speak with your wife. Decide if you're truly willing to do what it takes. But know this, if you want him, it will not be easy. And if you fail, the boy will be taken from you forever." She turned and left, her figure vanishing into the snow. Inside, the cabin shook with silence. Margaret dropped to her knees and hugged Samuel tightly, rocking him as tears poured from her eyes. Henry knelt beside them, his hand resting on both of their shoulders. He had never felt so sure of anything in his life. "Listen to me," he whispered. "We will not lose you. No matter what it takes, we'll fight for you. You are ours now." Samuel buried his face into Margaret's chest, whispering through tears, "I just want a family. Please, don't let them take me away." Margaret kissed the top of his head, her voice fierce despite her trembling. "You have a family now. We are your family." That night, none of them slept. Margaret sat by Samuel's bed, her hand clasped. Around his, afraid that if she let go, he would vanish. Henry sat by the fire, staring into the flames, planning the battle ahead. The cabin that had once been filled with silence now throbbed with love, desperation, and a fear too deep to name. For the Dawsons, the knock on their door had been a mistake, but for their hearts, it had been fate. And as dawn approached, truth became clear. They would risk everything to keep the child who had healed their broken souls. The next morning, the cabin was wrapped in tension. Margaret clung to Samuel as though every second mattered, while Henry prepared himself for the inevitable confrontation. When the knock came, their hearts froze. Mrs. Clark stood at the door again, this time with papers in her hand. Behind her, a carriage waited. The Williams family had arrived. Margaret's grip tightened on Samuel. He buried his face against her chest, refusing to look. Henry stepped forward, his voice steady, though his hands shook. "Before you take him, hear us. We are not asking for pity. We are asking for a chance. This boy came to our door not by our will, but by something greater. Look at him, look at us. You can't deny what you see." Mrs. Clark's eyes softened, but the Williams couple emerged from the carriage. They looked kind, prepared, expectant. The wife held a small quilt, the husband a toy horse. They had prepared for Samuel's arrival for weeks. Their presence was a knife twisting into Margaret's heart. Samuel trembled, torn between two unknown paths. His eyes darted from the Williams, family to Margaret and Henry. Then, with all the strength in his small body, he cried out, "I don't want to go! Please, I've found my home. Please let me stay!" The plea broke like thunder. Margaret's sobs shook the room. Henry wrapped his arms around them both, his voice breaking as he faced Mrs. Clark. "You see? This is not choice. This is destiny. Papers can't measure what's in a child's heart. He belongs here, with us." Mrs. Clark's lips trembled. She turned toward the Williams family, whose hopeful faces had now fallen into sorrow. The wife pressed the quilt to her chest, tears filling her eyes. The husband nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. Finally, the woman whispered, "If his heart is here, we cannot force him away." Silence filled the cabin, broken only by Margaret's quiet sobbing. Mrs. Clark lowered the papers, her shoulders sinking. "Then it is decided," she said softly. "The boy stays with you." Margaret's cry echoed through the cabin, half laughter, half grief, as she pulled Samuel into her arms. Henry pressed his forehead against the boy's, whispering through tears, "You are our son now, forever." Outside, the Williams family climbed back into their carriage, carrying their pain in silence. They had lost what they longed for, yet they had chosen to honor the child's voice, and though their hearts broke, their sacrifice carved a deeper beauty into the moment. Samuel looked up at Margaret and Henry, his eyes wide with something he had never dared to feel: certainty. "You mean it?" he whispered. "You'll never send me away?" Margaret cupped his face in her trembling hands. "Never! From this day forward, you are ours, and we are yours." Henry placed his rough hand over theirs, sealing the promise. "By mistake you came to our door," he said, his voice thick with tears. "But by God's will, you will never leave." The fire crackled, the snow fell, and inside that small cabin, 3 broken souls found healing in one another. What began as a wrong knock became the answer to years of prayers. And though the world would call it a mistake, to Samuel, to Margaret, and to Henry, it was the miracle that made them a family. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories every week. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and follow our journey here on Legacy Ignited. Your support means the world, Thank you for being part of this family. Ah.